Hey everyone, we are here this evening to talk about a topic that is coming up this time of year. So, turnover. A lot of anglers will talk about it, but I think people don't often know what it is. So, looked it up on National Geographic because they can explain it better than I can. And it is just simply the process of a lake's water turning over from the top layer to the bottom layer. So, what does this actually mean? First of all, let's talk about summer where we're at or just ending. A lot of people have had their warmest water temperatures in the last few weeks, and it's been coming down quite a bit here recently. And with that, the surface water, is the warmest because the sun is warming it up and just the summer heat and all of that is closest to that water on the top. That means that the water on the bottom of the lake will be the coolest. Now, with saying that, this does apply to your bigger lakes because in a smaller lake, that definition isn't quite as much. There's a lot more mixing. The sun can usually penetrate the water quite a bit more. And so when we talk about your warm water and your cool water in summer, that's really going to be your deeper lakes and your bigger lakes. So when we are in summer, we are looking at this on our graphs. And we actually pulled a picture from hummingbird.com. Because it was a good illustration of, for example, what it might look like on your hummingbird graph. So, Josh, what do we see here?
So you kind of see that a thermocline has like kind of the mixing line there, but it also takes up, about 5, 6, 7 feet there on the graph.
But a lot of times this will look different depending on the time of the year that you are, because depending how warm the water is on top and how cool the water is on bottom, that thermocline can be actually quite stark. So that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about coming up. Now, first, we started talking about turnover, so let's finish that topic. And as we are entering fall here, because we're not quite in summer anymore, I think next week begins fall officially. And so with that, the water is beginning to cool, and the more dense water, because cool water is more dense, and so as it cools, the water does begin to sink, and it does push the other water back up, and that actually creates a literal mixing in the lake, and that brings the stuff from the bottom, and a lot of times it's yucky, it's floating around at the top, and a lot of times it smells, and it'll come to the top, and that is what people are calling turnover. So with that, that creates a lot of crazy situations for fishing, but a moment that we do need to stop and talk about those layers while we're here is that thermocline is what actually the line between the warm and the cool waters is called. And so we actually have a graph, I think, here. So you can see here that you have warm water on top, you have the cool water on bottom, and they have kind of the scientific terms there. But the thermocline is what is in the middle. So recently we were out on a lake and we were using our AquaView. And what happened is I was dropping down because I was looking to see, well, I was looking for crappies. And so let's pull up the video here. And so we drop down and I see something kind of strange floating, and I knew it wasn't quite the bottom. And so with that, I'm able to kind of drop below it, and I'm able to kind of come back above it. And along with using the graph, because I'm quite deep in the water at this point, I'm able to realize that this is actually what the thermocline looks like. And it's interesting because it's kind of a wavy day, so you can see the camera kind of bouncing above and kind of below, but you can see as the water temperatures even change above and below. But you can see that line, and you can see where the fish are relating to this thermocline, because we did just see a crappie go by, and I know that there's another one kind of coming up in the video here. But you can literally see, gosh, I'm trying to point in this camera, but you can literally see the distinction between the warm and the cold layers of water. And even if you watch close, yeah, and even if you watch close, as the camera kind of floats between the layers, it kind of mixes a little bit, which is crazy. But again, there is another fish just relating right above that thermocline.
Yeah, so if we kind of bring it back to where Emily's pulling it up here, I think you kind of show a little bit of the graph at the end, and I believe we were in about 18 or 20 feet of water here. So the thermocline was actually between, I don't know, 7 and 12 feet.
And
So
the
you
way
can,
that I have my graph set up, the thermocline isn't super defined in this moment on this graph, but I have it set because it was reading fish really well that day. So if you can help with interference, also hit me up about that because I have some crazy stuff on there. But you know, the crazy thing about this is you can go a whole day and you can find crappies. Like we literally put the camera down there and we found more than even what we just saw in this video. But they were not biting. So with turnover, that does a lot of crazy different things to the water. And in this case, this video is just before turnover, but we were seeing actually signs of some of it happening, maybe in slightly shallower areas where the thermocline had gotten all the way to that bottom and began that mixing process. So the fish, first of all, kind of get pushed around in different places than they were relating previously. So that certainly affects fishing. Yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just going back to you talking about some of the shallow areas getting hit harder. Like we got there in the morning, the water was a pretty consistent, 62 degrees, 64 degrees. But then you could notice that temperature changed, but then in the shallows, you could see a lot of that stuff floating up. And we had been catching fish in certain spots in the morning. And then once that turnover started getting, the air started warming, or the sun came out, started warming it up, and it started mixing again, those fish actually pushed away from those areas. And so a lot of times you're looking for those transition zones. This will push fish away from somewhere that maybe you were hitting them really good, and now you're not. And that could be within a couple hours. And they might have just pushed, in our case, the lake is fairly small, so, they could have pushed all the way across to the other side of the lake in just a matter of hours just because of that turnover.
And turnover does have really some great benefits because it does oxygenate the water. It really prepares it for winter, takes all of that stuff on the bottom and kind of helps that whole system cycle through. But again, it will shut that bite right down. So what do we do as anglers? We personally, Josh and I, look towards the river because at that point there is no turnover, there is no thermocline, there is no system like that. So if you're having consistent weather patterns, or you're having, they're biting on whatever specific, those are perfect times to head to the river and give your lakes a rest for a little bit of time. Otherwise, maybe try some of your smaller bodies of water if they're less affected by that thermocline. Not everyone is as blessed to have a beautiful river like the Wolf River by us. But there are certainly options, and the bite does get hard, but as we get closer to fall, that bite really does turn back on. So be patient and be persistent, and that is when we will find fish.